Today at Robert's Guitar Dungeon, I'm going to give you my list of the top 14 greatest guitar players ever. As we all know, the topic of greatest guitar players ever is a very subjective list. So let me clarify by saying that by greatest guitar players, I mean my favorite guitar players. We all have those guitar players that we look up to and admire, and the ones that I am including on this list are the ones who in my life I have listened to and just had that indescribable emotional connection to. I feel them and of course their music and their playing. That's what this list is about. So let's get to it. Number 14, Jimmy Page. As a kid in junior high in the 90s, 70s music was suddenly becoming popular again, and my guitar teacher had me learning Jimmy Page riffs all over the place, and I very quickly earned an appreciation for him. From songs like Whole Lotta Love, to Heartbreaker, to Stairway to Heaven, to When the Levee Breaks, to so many others. That guy just wrote so many riffs, and there is still a very strong argument that Led Zeppelin may very well be the greatest rock band ever. I admit I'm not much of a Beatles fan, but I do feel that Led Zeppelin took what the Beatles did and made it so much better. Number 13, Dann Huff. You may not know who this guy is. Back in the late 80s, there was a 80s metal band, 80s hard rock and metal band called Giant. Giant had a hit single ballad called I'll See You in My Dreams. But prior to that, on that same record, the first actual hit off that record was a song called I'm a Believer. And that song, the intro to that song is a ripping guitar solo from Dann Huff. And the entire album is filled with riffs like that. That band only did 2 albums, and that was all they did. And Dann Huff has since become better known for being a highly respected producer in the music industry who's worked with tons of people. But I am still clinging to hope of a Giant reunion someday, hopefully in the very near future, because I never got the chance to see him live. Number 12, Zoltan Bathory. If you're not familiar, this name Zoltan Bathory is one of the founding members of Five Finger Death Punch. The store that I was working at many years ago was actually hosted a meet and greet for Five Finger Death Punch, specifically for founding members Zoltan Bathory and drummer Jerry B. Spencer. I decided that as one of the guys that worked at that store, in order to be a good host to them, I should probably familiarize myself with their music, as at that point in time, other than their cover of Bad Company, I was not familiar with it at all. So I bought one of the records, put it in, and was absolutely blown away, wondering why I had not gotten into these guys any sooner, and I've bought every other record that was available right after that, and every record that's come out since. Zoltan Bathory is a fantastic guitar player. It was interesting getting to talk with him and hear his perspective on the gear that he uses and his approach to why he uses that gear. But more importantly, one thing that he shared with me that a lot of people don't know about, the man's actually a genius. He is now, I believe, an endorser of DBZ guitars, but prior to his endorsement with them, he, just as a favor, I guess, or because he knows the guys, all of the crazy designs like the Bird of Prey and several other guitar designs that they have were all designed by Zoltan Bathory, and he even told me then that a lot of people don't know about that. And I asked him, I said, how did you get into designing guitars? His answer nearly put me on the floor. I was so shocked to hear it. He said, I used to work for NASA, so I know how to get done. That's right, Five Finger Death Punch fans. Zoltan Bathory is an egghead. And a darn fine guitar player on top of that. Oh, and if I didn't mention it before, he's also a super great guy. I'm very fortunate to have had the chance to meet him. Number 11, Angus Young. Angus Young's been doing it long enough. He has inspired squillions of guitar players around the globe, but I couldn't go without including him on this list. I've always been an Angus Young fan. Every teenage guitar player that I know of that's wanting to learn to play rock guitar, everybody learns the main riff of Back in Black. I of course was no exception. But when I had an instructor sit down and teach me how to play You Shook Me All Night Long, particularly the solo, and I discovered that a great solo like that does not have to have any flashy shredding guitar parts in it to be a great solo. That's when I learned what kind of guitar player Angus Young really is and why he's as great as he is. Sometimes it's not all here, oftentimes it's up here. Number 10, Eddie Van Halen. If Angus Young has inspired squillions of guitar players, Eddie Van Halen's probably inspired tens or hundreds of squillions of guitar players. There is even still young kids today that want to grow up and play like Eddie Van Halen. I did a video recently where I talked about Get Off My Lawn Guy. And Get Off My Lawn Guy oftentimes likes to say that Eddie Van Halen was really the last true guitar hero. I personally disagree with that statement, but I do understand what it is that they're trying to say, because Eddie Van Halen is a name that everybody knows, and especially back in the 80s, there were teenagers flocking to music stores in droves to check out all the guitars, and they all wanted to be just like Eddie. He still continues to inspire young people today, even if it's not necessarily with his music. The gear that he is now responsible for putting on the market is extremely popular and selling like wildfire all over the place. But even if he was the head honcho at the EVH brand, we're still talking about the guy who blew the world away with his recording of Eruption, which will always be an argument for one of the greatest guitar solos ever written. And there were so many techniques in that recording that he used that nobody had ever used before him, and so many people have tried to implement since then. Number 9, John Petrucci. Dream Theater may be the most progressive band on the planet, and their songs are very, very complex, and it just boggles my mind how these things are, how these songs are constructed, because every one of them I've ever heard is extremely intricate. But even if they weren't, John Petrucci's guitar playing is up there among the very, very best. A graduate of the Berklee School of Music, he is very well trained in music and all aspects of it, and it all comes out in his guitar playing. The first Dream Theater record I ever listened to was probably their most popular, called Images and Words. Pull Me Under is the first track on that album, and the first time I heard that song, as soon as that opening distortion riff kicked in, that's when I was hooked, and I said, this is a guy that I get what he's doing. And I've been a fan ever since. Number 8, CC DeVille. Yes, I'm aware that I put CC DeVille ahead of John Petrucci, and that's why, if I didn't mention it before, these are not necessarily in any particular order other than the order that they came to me as I was writing them down. But why is CC DeVille on this list? CC DeVille gets a lot of flack for being a terrible guitar player, and it was even worse back in Poison's heyday in the 80s. A lot of people were making fun of CC DeVille, and I don't understand why. I've seen Poison live probably 15 times at least, and he always gets his own section of the show for his guitar solo, and that guy plays faster and more accurately than as anybody I've ever seen. But one thing a lot of people don't know is, a lot of people are familiar with the story of Poison, about how Brett and Ricky and Bobby were all best friends in Pennsylvania and decided they were going to make it big and loaded up their car and drove out to LA to make it big. And the rest is history. Well, the rest is not quite, because they struggled quite a bit, and they didn't meet CC DeVille until they got out there. And when they first got into the recording studio, CC DeVille was the only one in that band that was experienced at all. And he was constantly having to train them how to do simple things that are particularly important in the studio, like keep time. And that first record probably never would have gotten done if it weren't for CC DeVille. It was CC DeVille's skill and experience, in my opinion, that is one of the major reasons why Poison got off the ground in the first place. There's a lot of underrated guitar players out there, but I don't know that any of them are more underappreciated than CC DeVille. Number 7, Dave Mustaine. I have said on my channel numerous times that Metallica are my all-time favorite band, and that being said, I have never, ever, ever once in my life bought into the whole Metallica versus Megadeth fan base rivalry thing. I think it's a load of crap, because Megadeth is a great band too. Despite the story of how that band got started, it doesn't change the fact that Dave Mustaine is a great guitar player, and Dave Mustaine, I think even James Hetfield has said that Dave Mustaine may be the greatest rhythm guitar player on the planet. He writes amazing riffs, amazing songs. He's put out incredible records. Rust in Peace is one of the greatest metal records ever. And there is just awesome riffage going on all over the place on that album. I also find it interesting that, especially nowadays, he runs a very tight ship. When it comes to band practice, he doesn't allow anybody to show up wearing shorts and wearing sweatpants and tennis shoes. Everybody needs to be, dressed like they're ready to play in a metal band, clean shaven, sober. And those are all things that I think speak very highly of not just the work ethic, but the character of Dave Mustaine. Number 6, Dimebag Darrell. Pantera are one of my favorite thrash metal bands, and they were doing things that nobody had ever done before them. And Dimebag Darrell was by far the top of the list. He could play like nobody else could play. He could do things that nobody else could do. He sounded like nobody else sounded. Another thing was, especially at that time, when everybody else was using Marshall stacks and Super Strats and Les Pauls and things like that, the gear that he was using was so far off the radar. Dimebag, you didn't see him play anywhere not playing his trusty Dean ML and his Randall solid state amps. He actually played Randall solid state amps for most of his career. Whenever you hear Dimebag Darrell riff, you know that it's Dimebag Darrell, because nobody else sounded like he did. Nobody else played like he did. He was a very, very unique guitar player that I've always respected, and it's really a shame that he was taken from us as soon as he was. Number 5, Jerry Cantrell. Jerry Cantrell for me is just one of those guys that I just get it. Jerry, if you ever watch this video, please know that, yeah, you and I. Okay, that may be a stretch, but I just get it. Everything from the riffs that he writes, the riffs and the songs that he writes, and the solos that he writes, to the gear that he's using, everything about Jerry Cantrell I admire. While he is very capable, as anybody else out there, of being a great shredder, he has absolutely mastered the art of playing some of the most tasteful guitar solos that don't require any kind of speed shredder style playing at all, and having it absolutely fit the song that it's going with and the mood that he is trying to create. I don't know that anybody does that better than Jerry Cantrell. If you don't believe me, go listen to his solo on the song Wood, and then come back and have a conversation with me. That solo is anything but shredding. It was just all about the riffs he was playing, and as well as the effects that he was using and the sounds that he was creating with all of it combined, that just fit that song. Nobody could have written a solo for that song any better than he did. And that is why I have always felt that emotional connection with Jerry Cantrell and his music. You can call him a grunge band. I even call him a grunge band, but I think of all the Seattle grunge band scenes, they were kind of outside the box from what everybody else was doing back then. And in my opinion, Jerry Cantrell is the reason why. Number 4, Zakk Wylde. I remember thinking Zakk Wylde was kind of cool earlier in my childhood, and just because I had seen, we grew up without cable in our house, so I didn't really have access to MTV, but I had seen a couple of Ozzy music videos, and I thought the Bullseye Les Paul was kind of cool, and that was about all that I knew about it. But I had just gotten my driver's license, and I was driving home from school one day, and I was listening to the No More Tears record, and the title track on that album. As soon as that solo kicked in, all of a sudden I got these goosebumps on my arms, And the hair on my arms and my head, I had hair on my head at that time, all started standing up, and I was like, this is absolutely incredible. And my adrenaline started pumping, and I don't know how I didn't get a speeding ticket just from listening to that solo. And I have followed the man extremely closely ever since. And the arms on that guy, he's absolutely a walking gun show. He just looks like a guitar player that I would want to look like. But even as far as his skills go, nobody does. You can hear Zakk Wylde pinch harmonic, and you know what Zakk Wylde playing that fast is extremely difficult to do. But what he also does, it makes it even more difficult, is he doesn't utilize hammer-ons and pull-offs very much at all. He picks every single note, particularly in Black Label Society. And I love listening to him talk about his gear and his guitar playing and and anything guitar related, because he just knows how it's supposed to be done, and seems to be a really, really humble guy. Number 3, Paul Stanley and Ace Frehley. Yeah, we're talking about both guys, both the original guys from Kiss here. And Ace Frehley's always, of those two guitar players, Ace Frehley's always been the more popular, at least among guitar players. I actually always like Paul Stanley, as much as I love Ace. Ace wrote a lot of those classic riffs like She and Shout It Out Loud and I Love It Loud, and I think Come On and Love Me, I think was his, among many, many others. Shock Me. He wrote a lot of those riffs, and Paul Stanley also wrote a lot of them. But I always liked Paul quite a bit because, he was the rhythm guitar player, and I was always a rhythm guitar player, and I just always loved Paul's personality. But for me, seeing those two guys perform on stage anyway, I mean, those were the two guitar players that really made me want to play in a band someday. If you've never seen Kiss live, you need to while you still can. That's not a show, that's an experience. Number 2, Steve Vai. If Ace Frehley and Paul Stanley made me want to play in a band, Steve Vai is the guy, is the guy that darn near forced me to quit playing the instrument altogether. The first Steve Vai solo record that I ever heard was Passion and Warfare, which to this day is still probably his most popular record. But the first time I heard Rock Nightmares on that album, I knew then and there I am never going to be as good as Steve Vai. But at the same time, I couldn't stop listening to that album. Steve Vai's work on Passion of Warfare was some of the most incredible guitar work that I have ever heard, still to this day. And that's a record, in my opinion anyway, that's going to stand the test of time. There are very, very, very few guitar players that I hold in higher respect than Steve Vai. He's a guy that I really, really hope that I have the chance to meet someday. Number 1. James Hetfield. I mentioned earlier that Metallica are my all-time favorite band, and James Hetfield is the man that inspired me to want to pick up the instrument. I can remember in 1986 when a friend of mine that I grew up with in the neighborhood gave me a copy of not only Master of Puppets, but also Ride the Lightning at the same time on cassette tapes that he had recorded for me. And I listened to those things over and over and over again and couldn't put them down. Thank you, Trey. And ever since then, I became a fan, and just the way that even James's vocal recordings were just too cool for words for me. And seeing them in videos and then finally getting to see them perform live, James Hetfield was the coolest guy on the planet, and especially as a kid growing up, there was nobody on this planet bigger than James Hetfield. If I could have been just like anybody growing up as a guitar player, it would have been James Hetfield, no question. And to be honest with you, that probably still holds true today. There's a couple of guys on this list here that I would really like the opportunity to meet someday. I would give up the opportunity to meet every single one of them for a chance to meet James Hetfield. We all have our guitar heroes and the guy that we really wanted to be like growing up, and James Hetfield was my guy. I would not be involved in any of this had it not been for James Hetfield. That's all for this list. I'd love to see some comments from people and hear what your list of guitar players might be. Please, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to my channel. I upload new videos every Wednesday and Saturday morning. I will post links to anything pertaining to anything I may have mentioned in this video down in the description. Please feel free to check it out. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you soon in the next video. You know what? There are tons of young people out there that want to get involved in music and do not have the means to do so. If you are watching this video, most likely you're a musician, and many experienced musicians have tons of broken and unwanted gear lying around that they're not doing anything with. Please visit my friends at Share the Music on Facebook at the link below and learn how you and your unwanted gear can help change somebody's life.